The incarnation, the coming into the world of God, united to a human being, is unique, and so it escapes our categories. Jesus escapes our definitions, and yet we are invited by this witness to the revelation of Jesus, the Scriptures, to make comparisons, just so perhaps that we can get a little closer to what the incarnation is teaching us, closer to the teaching of Jesus and what we must do. Jesus himself compares, he says, to what shall I compare the kingdom of heaven? And then proceeds to tell a story. And so we're always invited to make comparisons, even though often they don't work. One of the comparisons that the church gives us today is the authority of Jesus with that of a prophet raised up by God. We have the promise to the people in the book of Deuteronomy that there will be a prophet after Moses. And so this invites us then to think about what authority a prophet might have. Now, it seems that what a prophet comes to be anyway over the history of the people of Israel, the history of the land, is one who guides by advice, one who shapes society, ostensibly through speaking in God's name. And we see much more clearly this role when the people lament that the role has disappeared, seen when it is absent. One of the Psalms, which seems to be set in times of dire straits, possibly at the end of one of the kingdoms, or even in the exile. The Psalm to God cries out that we do not see our signs. There is no longer a prophet. There's none among us who knows how long, presumably how long the distress will last. So in this, the lack of a prophet shows up the role. It's the same with the prayer of Azariah, who is one of those cast into the fire in exile in Babylon, that fiery furnace of Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel. The prayer laments that at this time there is no prince or prophet or leader. And so, again, we see the role. And even as we approach the fullness of time, the time when Jesus will come into the world, when God, the incarnation, will take place, nearer to this in the book of Maccabees, we have the people freeing the temple from pollution, and yet the altar stands polluted still. And so it says, the first book of Maccabees tells us that they stored the stones in a convenient place on the temple hill until a prophet should come to tell what to do with them. So we see not only are we told what role a prophet might have, but we see that as the history of Israel unfolds, they still don't have one. They don't have someone to tell them what to do. They don't have any authority. Now, of course, the context of hearing this moment in the village, the fishing village by the Sea of Galilee in Capernaum, where Jesus is teaching them in the synagogue, this is a Roman colonized Judea, the beginning, of course, of our era in the 1st century AD. And the people still don't have a prophet, but what they have for authority, what they have for leadership, are the chief priests and the scribes. Again, we can see this in the first book of Maccabees, because the Jews and their priests, it says, decided that Simon should be their leader and high priest forever until a trustworthy prophet should arise. And that's, as the century or so unfolds, the priesthood of the temple becomes that sort of authority next to the political authority of the colonizers of the Empire of Rome. This is seen when we look at some other incidents in the village of Capernaum. One that perhaps is appropriate to considering the authority of Jesus is another scene which is from, not in Mark, but in Matthew and in Luke, of a centurion, a Roman soldier, approaching Jesus to help heal his slave. So the Roman and Jewish authorities come together to approach Jesus. This centurion sees the authority of Jesus and compares it to his own. He says, "I also am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my slave, 'Do this,' and the slave does it." But is this an apt comparison? Remember, I said Jesus escapes all definitions and categorizations as the incarnate Son of God. And just as we're invited to make these comparisons about authority, Jesus explodes them. Jesus escapes them. So where is the authority, and what do we make of the authority? Jesus doesn't just have soldiers and slaves under him, but he commands, as St. Paul writes in the letter to the Colossians, commands all things in heaven and earth, seen and unseen, whether thrones or dominions or powers or authorities. So perhaps we see the extent of Jesus' authority. But what type of authority is it? It's not like a prophet, certainly not like one for which the people have been waiting, because he's not advising kings or governors or the chief priests and scribes in the temple. And he's not like the scribes, I presume, because the authority with which he speaks is not derivative of other writings of what has been said before. So all we can look at is what he does with his authority. The unclean spirit reacting to the truth, the incarnation, perhaps nearer to it, ironically, than those around in the synagogue, sees who Jesus is, and Jesus rebukes him. Jesus frees by his authority the man who needs healing, who needs freeing from the bounds of his sin, the bounds of the demons. So, Jesus' authority, the first place, his extent of his authority is complete and total. But the type of authority Jesus wields is salvation.